Okay, my name is Ze'ev Wurman, and I'm a visiting scholar with the Hoover Institution at Stanford in California. I am a former senior advisor in the U.S. Department of Education, and possibly more important, I have been a member of the California Academic Content Standard Commission that evaluated the Common Core for California. In my testimony, I will address really the common core problems in the area of mathematics, and there are a couple of sections there. And I will touch only on the assessment, especially the administration time of the assessment, and about the data collection. And again, those will be very brief. Next. The first question that was already touched before is the issue of pedagogy and curriculum in the Common Core versus just content. Here is the expectation. Why do we worry about curricula? Curricula are left for the districts. Not so. Consider that the ELA, one of the most famous aspects, requires 50-50 instructional time between informational text and literary text. This is not expectation. This is a dictate. Do it this way. It's even worse. You can ask, well, what's the basis of this? The basis of this is the NAEP testing. The number of items on NAEP is split this way. But it doesn't mean that you have to teach this amount of time in the classroom. One can imagine a program that is 80% literary, still very successful, but the item testing it be 50-50. But this is now disallowed. They tell you how to teach. If you move next to mathematics, you have similar big example. A congruence of triangles is enforced or requested to be taught in particular way using rigid motions that show that triangles are congruent. If those were a real content standard, they would say expectation, understand congruence of triangle or prove congruence of triangle, and not about dictating pedagogy. Use rigid motion. This is a major thing. And on this particular item, this experimental approach to geometry, Fordham Institute, Mike Petrilli was here a few minutes before, and they're generally supporter of this standard. Their own review noted that geometry standards represent a significant departure from traditional axiomatic Euclidean geometry, and no replacement foundation is established. It's a polite way to say they don't really have any evidence for this. Anyway, second aspect next. Second aspect is the issue of progression in the early grades, the K-8 really. You have heard from Dr. Milgram last time about the high school, and I will just barely touch on it. But what happens in K-8 is also very strange, and it's certainly not internationally benchmarked. It's really very uneven. In K1, there is a fast and furious process. And you have some examples here where in kindergarten they expect children not only do addition by groups, which is typical activity, but they actually expect them to translate it into a number sentence in kindergarten. Write digit 5 plus something equal, because this represents the addition in concrete object. This is never been done. Never is over. In large scale, you cannot find it in any state style. Another example, the last one. Compare the lengths of two objects indirectly by using a third object. That's basically not saying put 3 objects and check which one is the longer. That would be normal because those are concrete. But realize that A is bigger than B, separately that B is bigger than C. Now you figure out without manipulating that, A must be bigger than C, the transitivity content. It's possible to do, but nobody does it. And there are other examples here. In other words, they are very demanding in K1. Next. But then it slows down. It slows down so much that in 5 years later, they are about 1 or 2 grades behind. And we already mentioned here the issue of multiplication, so I will not dwell on this particular chart except the point to the bottom, which also was mentioned by the previous speaker. Finding by Professor Henry Porter, high-performing countries' emphasis on perform procedures runs counter to the widespread call in the Common Core for greater emphasis on higher-order cognitive demand. In other words, this is not what high-achieving countries are doing. Next. I'm speaking fast because it's late and everybody's tired. If you want me to slow down, and by the way, forgive my accent, Slow me down. Anyway, the issues of algebra in grade 8. This was a demand that was noted by the National Maths Advisory Panel in 2008. This was even noticed by the Benchmarking for Success, the seminal paper in 2008 by the NGA and Achieve and CCSSO that promoted the idea of national standard. They promised at this point, we'll make national standard and they will require algebra in grade 8, because that's what everybody is doing if he's high achieving. Well, by the end of this process, a year later, algebra disappeared from grade 8. Now it's firmly in high school. Next. I wanted to move a little bit to the side and show you what is the meaning of real success. And my definition of success is exactly this slide, which is increased advanced math course taking, increased success on the taking, and the minority and disadvantaged student closing the gap. All this on the real, solid curriculum and not some diluted courses. Next. Now, what you see here, and you have black and white, but there is behind you chart in color, are result of Algebra 1 taking in California over the last, 13, 14 years. The top orange slice, not slide, are the proficient and advanced. So those are the successful takers. Look how the number grew over the years, and on the bottom you see just the actual number of the students that succeeded. It's from 52,000 to 170,000, more than 3 times in Algebra 1. But people say, well, that's not enough, Algebra 1, and then what? Next slide. Hold it, one back. Oh, I didn't do this. Okay, no, go back. Fine, that's good. Now, this is looking at Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry in high school, disaggregated by ethnicity and by socioeconomic level. Look, the huge increases in the disadvantaged population, much higher than for the white population. Because that's what really happened in California. Even before 1999, we had some fraction of students that actually took algebra in grade 8 and were very successful. It was a small fraction, 16%. And they tended to come from advantaged environment, families that could give them the support and the push, the extracurricular support. Now, when we made the K7 standards offer preparedness for everyone, this is where the disadvantage shined. And that's why you see numbers like 5 and 6 times increases, both in absolute numbers in the ratio, while among the whites, it's less than 2. That's exactly how it should look like. Next. This is the same information, except that over the years, you see how the gap has closed in those 3 different things. What all these slides were supposed to next convey is that early preparation matters, and it translates to higher achievement in high school. It's not just, okay, so they did algebra in grade 8, who cares? No. Many more of them took Algebra 2, successful Algebra 2, many more took successful geometry. We don't have tests in California for higher courses that are statewide, so I cannot give you these numbers. Now, what was the key? The key was preparation of everyone, not just the advantaged students for taking this. And that's how it worked. Not everybody was ready, but those that were mostly coming from the minorities. Next. I think everybody asked the question, well, it sounds so good, so why is California lagging? I mean, we all know that California is not doing well, right? Well, kind of. But we also had a huge change of demographics. And you see the numbers here. We increased the Latino population from 42 to 54, the lowest socioeconomic status from 42 to 56, and the fraction of white dropped from 35 to 25. Those are huge changes. Despite that, California climbed, and rather than being in the top 2 or 3, now it's the bottom 2 or 3, I wish. It climbed to maybe the bottom 5 or 7. But if you factor in the demographic change, we are then essentially in the middle of the pack with all these changes. And there was huge increases. Next. Well, so what do the people respond to that about Common Core? They say, well, Common Core doesn't prepare for Algebra 1, but we can accelerate. Sure you can. But who will come into these courses? Only kids that got extra push, because the default K7 does not prepare them. So again, you go back to the advantaged kids that get the chance because the parents push, the parents pay for Kumon, and they end up in those courses. So you will always have some fraction. But you will have no massive increases from the disadvantage because they don't get this push, they don't get this support, they don't get the paid Kumon. Okay, next. I want to end this section with the issue of STEM. I am an engineer, by the way, by profession, so maybe I should shed some light. We already saw last week that any college degree if you get just Algebra 2, you has about 30 to 40% getting any college degree. He also mentioned that if you start a college with pre-calculus, you have a chance of 1 in 50 to start and finish a STEM degree. 1 in 50. It's not true that you need a calculus to enter college, except very selective colleges. But you do need pre-calculus to enter any four-year college, really. If some four-year colleges are not selective and they allow you to go with college algebra. But this is really not what they expect. It's essentially a remedial class given in college. Next. I'm basically here reiterating what I mentioned before. It does not, the current Common Core does not include pre-calculus, trigonometry, and even the Algebra 2 and geometry are missing chunks of content. California had to add a lot of this. It was mentioned before because DPI people from previous hearings mentioned that California actually eliminated all the additions. That is not true. In high school, we added a lot of content, including statistics, including calculus, which brings me to the issue of, okay, so everybody can add, so what's the big deal? Okay, so you didn't choose to add, maybe tomorrow you will. You add the classes. But again, if your K7 doesn't start early to prepare the kids for graded algebra, how many will be ready to enter these courses? Again, the elite, the 10%, the 20%, and that's it. What about the other 20, 40, 60%? And we end up with 7 national and 12% in Wisconsin being ready for STEM. So the fact that you will offer these courses in some districts, whether in a consistent way across the state or individual by district, is nice. But it really doesn't solve the problem because the pipeline that feeds it is not there. It's dumped down. Okay, I will skip next. Next. Okay. My summary of this section, and I have just a few slides left, is that the Common Core is uneven. It's over-demanding in K1 and slow in 2.8 and undemanding again in high school. It does include pedagogy and curriculum. It does include large experimental component, the foundation of geometry. It has a track record of failure in the Soviet Union in 1970s, and it was probably the biggest mathematician in Soviet Union that tried to teach it to gifted classes. He had a special gifted school. And after a couple of years, they abandoned it, and they said, no, it didn't work. So that's the only track record of this method. And now we're imposing it on the whole nation. The abandonment of algebra in grade 8 is not only a sign of dumping down, it's actually going to be a disaster in the making for the STEM pipeline. And the minorities will be the worst, suffering from this. Okay, let me go just next slide. A couple of things, I switch track here and I go to the smarter balance assessment. What I did in this table here, I pulled out the time of administration of tests today, and it's somewhere less than 4 hours, depending on the grade, whether it's 315 or 345 today for both math and ELA. Under the smarter balance, it will be somewhere between 7 and 8.5 hours. Forget about the cost. People are already complaining about too much testing. You are doubling it. Not only that, next. We require 2 testing windows, one for the performance item, one for the computer adaptive testing. Each one, 2-3 weeks at least. Altogether, you almost take 2 months out of the school schedule for testing, which means reduce instructional schedule, computers are pulled out of the classroom to testing. You are impacting learning in a major way. And obviously we mentioned technology, but the question is, what does it buy you eventually? Okay, so we do it. And I think one of you asked, won't we have to do something similar for ourselves? This one gives you possibility of enrolling in college algebra for credit in college. That's it. College algebra is glorified algebra 2. And that's all you get for all this investment. Maybe you can do better. Next. I switch track again. I want to talk about data collection. Because this issue, I think, had a lot of emotional responses. Some of them are not in my discussion, and I have just 3 points. This is clearly not part of the Common Core standards. So I think nobody argues that. What it is, it's part of the smarter balanced assessment and from the PARC assessment. And here is the excerpt from the contract between the Smarter Balance and the U.S. Department of Education. And note, develop a strategy to make student-level data, not aggregate data, available on ongoing basis. Research, validity, program improvement can cover anything, by the way. Subject the applicable privacy laws. Well, not so bad. Subject to privacy laws. Next. What is this privacy law? It's FERPA, the Family Education Record Privacy Act, I believe. But a couple of years back, FERPA was reinterpreted by ED, and here is a quotation directly from Federal Register. Education program that now means that it includes a non-educational agency, human services agency, workforce or labor agency, both commercial and non-profit and governmental, anything basically, as long as the government decides that it wants to give it. It's okay. So at the moment you belong to consortium, you can give it the data, because that's part of the testing. They will have the obligation to transfer student-level data to the government. Now, what the big deal? It's just testing data. You don't put fingerprints, you don't put retinal scans, I hope, in this thing. Just test data. What the big deal? Next. And this is my last slide. The issue is not the privacy issue here. The issue is that once you have the regular testing data at the government hand and based on uniform standards across the nation, this allows number crunchers to start planning and say, okay, Joe in Idaho did good on these 3 standards and bad on those 3 standards over the last 7 years. Nothing private, nothing about religion, nothing about salary, nothing about anything, just data of the testing. Therefore, Johnny probably doesn't want to be a flight controller, but he may be a welder. Well, this is America. How do we enforce it? Well, how about if the government one day say, well, his educational record clearly shows that he's not suited for this, because we are smart in Washington, we see his record and we know exactly what each item meant on the test. Therefore, if he decides to go for flight controller anyway, we will not give him student loans, because it will be a waste of money. It's a program improvement aspect. We don't want to throw money for a candidate that will have very low chance to succeed. Would you want to throw your tax money after such candidate? Sounds very reasonable. Now, the last point is quotation of the Joanne Weiss. She was the chief of staff of Arnie Duncan until a few months ago. And she basically said early this year, we are considering monitoring individual students in the States, because the flexibility waiver is not good enough. We can move from subgroup to a more personalized view where every single child gets what they need. Sure, who decides? Somebody in Washington. What your individual child in your individual state needs. And I will leave you with that. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Questions from committee members? I'll start with, on the end there, with Representative Hessel.
Thank you very much. Just want a quick check. You wrote, I felt like I was listening to a few weeks ago, you authored a book with Dr. Statsky?
I used to.
Did you write a book?
I wrote some report with Dr. Stolsky, yes.
Okay, the Common Core standards still don't make the grade. That's your book.
Something like that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Just wanted to be sure. It sounded very familiar from a few weeks ago. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your testimony and coming all this way. If you start children with Algebra 1 in 7th grade, or 8th grade, get them going. What do you suggest for juniors and seniors in high school? Required math or not?
Not at all. Not at all. It's an excellent question, because before it was said correctly, look, suppose we put calculus in the Common Core. Imagine the failure rate then. And that was a fair question, except that nobody suggested to put calculus and demand everybody taking it. That would be foolishness. What one would expect is that had the core standard show the breadth of the curriculum in high school. That includes certainly up to pre-calculus, because this is not college course. There is no AP pre-calc. There is only AP calc. So arguing that calc is college course maybe work for calculus, not for pre-calculus. There is no AP pre-calc. Anyway, and then decide which children, based on their own choices, want to go where, and make it clear to the public. And then it would end up possibly in the same place. Algebra 2 for everybody, if you want to go to any kind of college, non-selective college, community college. But you also will be told that if you want to go higher, for regular four-year selective college, you probably want to take at least 3 beyond it. You want to go to STEM, you'd better take at least pre-calc and hopefully calc. And then it would be clear. What happened today is that the definition of college readiness became a charade. Everybody says we have career and college ready standard, and again, we all ignore the career, another discussion. But they are very particular college type readiness, but the parents don't see it. They're not in this hearing, all of them. And they see career ready, college ready. Okay, so my child is fine, so why should I push him more? He is on track to college, so why should I push him to take anything more? That's the problem. It's not that somebody had to put calculus and say everybody takes calculus. That's foolish. But put it there so it's there. And it's clear. If you want to community college or non-selective, up to here. You want to regular four-year college, up to there. You want STEM, you need that. Today, it's nowhere there. California added it. I don't know what kind of a job of PR it will do to let parents know what's going on. But the Common Core should have done it, because now all the country is talking about college readiness. It's so much more rigorous. It prepares everybody for college, if you believe it. Suddenly kids became so bright that everybody goes to college and 100% success.
If I can just follow up, Mr. Chairman, I agree with you that there are a number of young people who do not take a regular, they have these big plans for college or whatever, but they don't take the rigorous curriculum that they ought to. I think, one idea is to get them started earlier and get them into thinking about it earlier, and maybe you'll pick up a few more. The other way to go about it is just require more math or get more young people to stick with it. There's a lot of folks who do geometry, algebra 2, and then they leave a year. We heard testimony earlier today about that. They leave a year off and they don't take the math then. That's not anything to do with Common Core. It's not to do with what the offerings are in the school. It's the young person and their parent don't push themselves, or they don't push the kid enough to make sure that they're taking every offering that is in those schools.
It's, again, an excellent question, because it's a real point. There is a lot of recommendations going on saying, everybody should take at least 4-year math in college, whatever kind of math. And if we push it too early, well, they're done. They will slack off. Now I'm talking about opinions. I'm not talking about evidence, because there is very bad evidence that this is important. There's very correlational evidence that doesn't really provide anything. I believe students should go as far as they are willing to go. And I want the counselors and the parents and the families push them as much as they can. But if the child doesn't want to go, they should be able to choose a non-academic career. Finland, the place that everybody is talking about, has almost half of their cohort choosing vocational track after grade 9. 40-something%. This is Finland, supposedly the pinnacle of good education. We don't do it. We destroyed much of the vocational ed we had here. So I don't want to push kids to take, Algebra 2, 4 years or whatever, or repeat something, just because somebody said, oh, you have to take 4 years maths. That's, again, I consider it's unsubstantiated and rather foolish. I do want to offer more choices, though. And I do want to offer those choices so they can switch track if they a year later decide, well, you know what, I changed my mind. So I want them opportunity. I don't want them to be stuck in those tracks. But I do want to offer them.
Any other questions from committee members? Representative Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's unfortunate, but there's been sort of an air of suspicion planted here in this committee. So I need to ask you, who is paying for your expenses to be here?
Okay, that's fair. First of all, I will be happy to answer, and the answer is very similar to the previous speaker. One person, a citizen of Wisconsin, contacted me through email and asked me if I'm willing to come, and he said he will take care of my expenses, travel expenses. And I still didn't see the check, but I expect $609 there, which is exactly my cost of expenses. That doesn't include anything beyond the travel, not even meals. Now, I assume you are here, by the way, on a per diem in addition to covering the travel expenses. Everybody who spoke here from a school district also comes typically on the release time, and they are paid for the time. But I had to travel a day, spent 2 days basically traveling before I go home, paid nothing for it because I think it's important, except cover my expenses of travel.
And
That's
who was
all.
that citizen?
Beg pardon?
Who was that citizen?
Does it matter? Does it matter?
It does to me, yes.
Okay. It was Mr. Duke Peshta, I believe he was talking to you 1 or 2 meetings before. He invited me to come over.
He invited you.
Right, and I don't know exactly how I will be paid, when I will be paid and such. But I know exactly how much I will get, I hope.
So you were willing to come here just hoping that, okay.
Well,
And then
I think
the
this
other
is important. I think these questions try to shed very questionable light of people that suddenly show up. Well, you didn't ask this question, I believe, on Mr. Petrilli from Fordham Foundation.
He lives in Wausau. I think he could probably afford to drive across
he
town.
lives in Washington, D.C.
His letterhead said Wausau.
He lives and works in Washington, D.C. He's a colleague of mine, and I like him. But the question should be asked from everybody, including
I didn't ask it
the panel.
because the handout had Wausau on it, and I assumed he lived in Wausau. But my other question was, oh dear, I may have forgotten it. Sorry, it's gone.
Well, we're going to move on.